What would you do if the person you trusted the most, the one who held your heart and your future, suddenly turned cold and threw you a facelift? Can you picture it? You're 7 months pregnant, standing in the doorway of the home you built with the man you love, and he tells you to leave. Just like that. No explana. It's not just about heartbreak, it's about the rug being pulled from under your entire world. And in that moment, you're not just losing a husband, you're losing the life you thought you. But here's the thing. This isn't a story about weakness. It's not about a woman falling apart. It's about what happens next. About the moment someone you never imagined would care, shows up, reaches out, and hands you not just a key, but a chance to reclaim everything. Trust me, this story is going to hit something deep inside you. Because it's not just about betrayal. It's about resilience, about discovering your own strength when everything else falls away. And I promise, you won't see the twist coming. Sienna Wakefield traced the delicate embroidery on a pair of tiny cream-colored booties, a soft smile gracing her lips. At 7 months pregnant, her world had beautifully, wonderfully narrowed to this. To the gentle kicks and flutters within her, and to the love she felt for her husband, Julian. From the bay window of their sprawling estate in Aspen, Colorado, the late autumn sun cast a golden glow across the snow-kissed lawn, making the frost on the rose bushes sparkle like a king's ransom in diamonds. It was a fairy tale, and she was its unlikely princess. She wasn't born to this world of silent Teslas, charity galas that raised more money than her entire hometown's yearly budget, and casual conversations about wintering in Gstaad. Sienna had been a literature professor in a small Vermont college, a woman who found her riches in the hushed aisles of old libraries and the worn pages of leather-bound books. She met Julian Wakefield during his company's technology summit in Burlington. He was a titan of industry, the visionary founder of Wakefield Innovations, a man whose face was a regular feature on financial magazine covers. He was sharp, driven, and possessed an intensity that could be intimidating. But with her, he had been different. He'd been charmed by her quiet wit, her passion for stories, and her complete lack of interest in his net worth. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance, straight out of one of the Bronte novels she so dearly loved. He pursued her with single-minded focus, flying her to Denver, showering her with experiences she had only dreamed of. He wasn't just buying her things. He was sharing his world. From the high-stakes pressure of his boardrooms to the quiet solitude of his private cabin nestled deep in the Rockies. He seemed to value her perspective, her calm presence in his chaotic life. When he proposed 6 months later, on one knee in the middle of a historic bookshop in Boston, her yes came like a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Their first year of marriage was idyllic. Julian was a doting husband. He'd leave her little notes tucked into her books. He'd have his private chef recreate recipes from her mother's worn-out cookbook. And he'd hold her at night, whispering his dreams for their future, for the children they would have. When she told him she was pregnant, he wept with joy. He immediately began renovations on a suite of rooms, transforming them into a state-of-the-art nursery, complete with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest. He was going to be a father, and his excitement was palpable. A vibrant energy that filled their enormous home with warmth. The only slight friction in her perfect life was her mother-in-law, Beatrice Wakefield. Beatrice was the matriarch of the Wakefield Empire, a woman carved from Colorado stone and polished to a terrifyingly elegant sheen. She was a widow who had seamlessly taken the reins of her late husband's investment firm, multiplying its value with a shrewdness that was legendary. Beatrice wasn't overtly cruel to Sienna. She was simply observant. Her compliments always felt like evaluations, her questions like interrogations. Sienna felt that in Beatrice's cool blue eyes she would always be the literature professor from Vermont, a charming but ultimately unsuitable match for the Wakefield dynasty. Beatrice attended their weekly family dinners, her posture perfect, her conversation precise. And she always left Sienna feeling like she had just failed an unspoken test. The change in Julian was subtle at first, a shadow creeping at the edges of their sun-drenched life. It started about 3 weeks ago. He became more withdrawn. His phone calls grew more frequent and were held in hushed, tense tones behind the closed door of his study. The easy laughter that Sienna cherished grew rare. He would stare into the distance, his jaw tight, his mind clearly miles away from the nursery plans or the baby names they were supposed to be discussing. When she tried to ask what was wrong, he would just shake his head, force a smile, and brush it off. "Just pressure at work, sweetheart," he'd say, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "A big acquisition. Nothing for you and the little one to worry about." But Sienna knew it was more than that. She saw the way he checked the security monitors more often, the way he'd started varying his routes to and from the office. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in her chest, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. Tonight, the silence in the house was heavier than usual. Julian had been home for 2 hours, but had barely said a word. He'd picked at the magnificent dinner the chef had prepared, and now stood by the grand fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid, his back to her. The fire crackled, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Julian?" Sienna began, her voice soft, trying to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. She stood up, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly, a gesture of both protection and reassurance. "Talk to me, please. Whatever this is, we can face it together. That's what we promised." He didn't turn around. "Together." He repeated the word, hollow, devoid of any meaning. He took a long swallow of his drink. "Yes. Together. You, me, and our baby." She took a step closer. "I love you. Let me help you." Finally, he turned. The look on his face struck her with the force of a physical blow. The warmth, the love, the adoration she had built her life upon was gone. In its place was a chilling emptiness, a coldness so profound it made her shiver. His eyes, the same eyes that once looked at her like she was the center of his universe, now looked at her like she was a stranger, a nuisance. "That's the problem, Sienna," he said, his voice flat and cruel. "The baby. This whole situation." Sienna's heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. "What are you talking about? What situation?" He gestured vaguely around the opulent room, a gesture that seemed to encompass her, her pregnancy, their entire life together. "This isn't working for me anymore. I'm not happy." The words didn't make sense. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. "Not happy, Julian? Just yesterday you were talking about teaching our son to ski." "We were happy. What's changed?" Her voice trembled, a desperate plea for an explanation, for the man she knew to return. He walked over to the bar and refilled his glass, his movements deliberate, unnervingly calm. "People change, Sienna. Feelings change. The reality of this, it's not what I want. I made a mistake. A mistake. Their love, their marriage, their unborn child. A mistake." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "A mistake," she whispered, the word a shard of glass in her throat. "How can you say that?" "It's easy," he said, turning to face her fully, his expression a mask of indifference. "I want you to leave." The breath left her body in a whoosh, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "Leave? What do you mean, leave?" "Go where, Julian? I'm 7 months pregnant with your child." "I'm aware of your condition," he said. The clinical phrase was a fresh stab to her heart. "I'll have my lawyers arrange a settlement. You'll be well taken care of financially. You can go back to Vermont, find a nice apartment. You and the baby will have everything you need, except for me." Tears were now streaming down Sienna's face, hot and blurring the monstrous image of her husband standing before her. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a horrible waking nightmare. "I don't want your money, Julian. I want you. I want our family." "Well, you can't have it." He snapped. His voice, finally rising, was laced with a venom she had never heard before. "I want you out of this house. Tonight?" "Tonight?" Her voice cracked on the word. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? It's dark. I have nothing." "That sounds like a personal problem." He said it with a cruelty that was absolute. He walked past her deliberately, avoiding her gaze, and picked up the phone on the console table. "I'll have one of the security guards, Martin, drive you wherever you want to go. A hotel, a friend's place. I don't care. Just get your things and be gone within the hour." He was looking at her now, his face unreadable, but his eyes were like chips of ice. There was no negotiation in them, no flicker of doubt. It was a verdict, an execution. "Julian, why?" she begged, her entire being consumed by a pain so vast she could barely stand. "Please, just tell me why. What did I do?" He looked away, toward the cold, dark windows. "You didn't do anything. he said, his voice dropping to a low, almost guttural tone. "This is just how it has to be. Now go pack." He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, each one a hammer blow to her shattering heart. Sienna stood frozen, the silent tears tracking paths down her cheeks, her hand protectively cradling the life inside her. The life her husband, the man she loved more than anything, had just discarded as a mistake. The fairy tale was over. The gilded cage had been flung open, and she was being cast out into the cold, unforgiving night. The hour Julian gave her was both an eternity and a blink of an eye. Numbly, Sienna moved through the dreamlike corridors of the mansion. The place she had called home now felt as alien and hostile as a foreign country. She walked past the nursery, its door slightly ajar. The soft moonlight illuminated the edge of the whimsical forest mural. A prancing fawn was just visible. A sob caught in her throat, so violent it felt like it would tear her apart. She quickly shut the door, unable to bear the sight of the future that had been stolen from her. In their master suite, his master suite now, she pulled out a single suitcase. What does one pack for the end of their world? She mechanically folded a few maternity dresses, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grasp the fabric. She packed her toiletries, a book she'd been reading, and the small worn photo album of her and Julian from their first year together. In the pictures, they were radiant, their smiles genuine, their eyes full of a future that now lay in ruins. She saw the picture from the bookshop in Boston, the moment of his proposal, and a fresh wave of grief washed over her. Was that man a lie? Had this entire year been a meticulously crafted deception? Every object in the room screamed his name. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air. His favorite armchair sat empty by the window. The weight of his betrayal was suffocating, a physical pressure on her chest that made it hard to breathe. The coldness in his eyes, the finality in his voice. It was the work of a stranger, not her husband. The Julian she knew would have fought a dragon for her. This new Julian had become the dragon himself. She zipped the suitcase, the sound echoing the finality of her departure. She took one last look around the room, a mausoleum of her dead happiness. On the nightstand, next to a stack of business journals, was a small silver frame. It held a picture of her taken on their honeymoon in Italy, laughing into the camera, her hair blowing in the sea breeze. For a moment, a wild, desperate hope flared in her. Maybe this was a test, a cruel, insane test of her love. Maybe he would come back through the door, his face full of remorse, and pull her into his arms. But the door remained closed. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breathing. The hope died as quickly as it had come, leaving behind only the bitter ashes of reality. Martin, the head of their security detail, a stoic man with kind eyes, was waiting for her in the grand foyer. He refused to meet her gaze, his discomfort a palpable thing in the cavernous space. He took her single suitcase, his touch gentle, his expression one of profound pity. It was almost worse than anger. It confirmed her status as a victim, a pitiable creature to be escorted off the premises. "Where to, Mrs. Wakefield?" Martin asked, his voice low and respectful, as if he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge the new reality. The question hung in the air. Where to? She had no one in Aspen. Her friends were all back in Vermont. Her parents were retired and living in a quiet senior community in Arizona. Calling them in the middle of the night with this catastrophic news felt impossible, a burden too heavy to place on their peaceful lives. She couldn't bear the thought of their worry, their questions, to which she had no answers. "A hotel," she finally managed to say, her voice hollow. "Any hotel. Just away from here." The drive down the winding roads of the mountains was a torturous blur. The familiar gates of their estate, the opulent homes of their neighbors, all felt like scenes from someone else's life. Martin drove in silence. The quiet hum of the luxury SUV was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. He didn't take her to a five-star resort in downtown Aspen or a luxury inn by the lakeside. Whether it was his own discretion or a final cruel instruction from Julian, she didn't know. Instead, they drove farther east, deeper into the sprawling, anonymous stretch beyond the ski villages, until he pulled up to a modest, clean-looking, but utterly generic hotel chain. The kind of place people stayed during business travel. Not where a millionaire's pregnant wife landed after being thrown out of her home. Martin carried her bag to the lobby. "Mr. Wakefield has arranged for the room to be paid for a week," he said, handing her a key card. "He also instructed me to give you this." He held out a thick envelope. Sienna stared at it. "What is it?" "Cash," Martin said, his gaze fixed on a point over her shoulder. $10,000, he said, "for your immediate expenses." $10,000, a pittance to Julian. But to her it was the price of a clean break. Blood money, the final transaction to sever their lives. Her fingers twitched at her side, aching to slap the envelope from his hands. Her lips trembled, not from rage but shame. Somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "Maybe this is what you deserve." Maybe she had rushed things, believed too much in fairy tales spun from old books and fleeting affection. Had she mistaken intense gestures for real love? Was she too naive to read between the silences? She wanted to throw it back in Martin's face, to scream that she didn't want his charity, his conscience money. But the raw, pragmatic fear for her child, for their immediate future, overrode her pride. She was alone, pregnant, and penniless. She took the envelope. The paper felt slick and woozy beneath her trembling fingers. "Thank you, Martin," she whispered, though the words felt like dust in her mouth. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her, his professional mask slipping for just a second. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice full of genuine regret. And then he was gone. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal. A bed with a stiff, patterned bedspread, a small desk, a television bolted to the wall, and a window overlooking a brightly lit parking lot. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. After the bespoke luxury of the mansion, with its fresh flowers and custom-blended air, the contrast was a physical shock. This was her new reality, a lonely, anonymous room. She sank onto the edge of the bed. The springs groaned in protest. The full weight of what had happened finally crashed down on her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few hours evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bottomless despair. He was gone, her husband, her love, her future. It had all been an illusion. She curled into a ball on top of the stiff bedspread, wrapping her arms around her belly, and wept. She cried for her lost love, for her broken heart, for the child who would now be born into a broken home. She cried until her body ached and her throat was raw, until there were no tears left to shed. Sometime in the pre-dawn hours, exhaustion finally claimed her. She fell into a fitful, haunted sleep. She dreamed of Julian, the loving version of him, smiling at her, holding her hand. But when she reached for him, he dissolved into smoke. His laughter turned into the cold, cruel words he'd spoken by the fireplace. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, the phantom pain as real as the lumpy mattress beneath her. The first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the thin curtains. A new day. For Sienna, it felt like the first day of a life sentence. She lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, a single question echoing in the desolate silence of her mind. Why? The reason he had given, that he was simply not happy, was too flimsy, too absurd. It didn't align with the man she knew, the man who had meticulously planned their future. There had to be something else, a darker, deeper reason for this sudden surgical cruelty. But what could it be? Had he found someone else? Was he in some kind of trouble? The lack of answers was a form of torture, leaving her to endlessly cycle through 1,000 horrifying possibilities, each one more painful than the last. She was adrift in a sea of confusion and pain, with no land in sight. The first 24 hours in the anonymous hotel room were a descent into a specific kind of hell. It wasn't a place of fire and brimstone, but one of beige walls, stale air, and profound, soul-crushing silence. Sienna existed in a limbo of grief. Time lost its structure, marked only by the shifting light that filtered through the thin, grimy curtains. The harsh glare of midday giving way to the lonely, neon-tinged gloom of night, and then the gray, hopeless light of dawn. The room itself was an insult. The bedspread was stiff and scratchy against her tear-sensitive skin. The air conditioner hummed, a relentless, monotonous tune that grated on her raw nerves. Every detail, from the water ring on the cheap wooden nightstand to the bolted-down television, was a testament to her new status. She was transient, temporary, utterly alone. She was a professor, a woman whose life had been shaped by narratives. Now, she was trapped in a story where the plot had taken a sudden, inexplicable, and cruel turn. She endlessly replayed the final scene with Julian, dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for a clue she had missed. His eyes, once her haven, had been cold, empty portals. His voice, which had once whispered promises of forever, had sliced her apart with clinical precision. "This isn't working for me anymore. I made a mistake." The words echoed in the silent room, each repetition a fresh stab of pain. Had she been that blind? Had the entire love affair, the marriage, the joyous conception of their child, all been a grand performance on his part? She tried to remember their early days, the spontaneous road trips, the slow dances in the kitchen, the quiet mornings he'd read her favorite novels aloud just to hear her laugh. But now even those memories felt suspiciously curated, like scenes from a show tailored to keep her hooked. The thought was a poison, seeping into every happy memory she possessed, tainting it, turning it into a lie. Her phone became both a lifeline and an instrument of torture. Several times, with a trembling hand and a heart full of desperate, stupid hope, she called Julian's number. The first few attempts, the familiar ringing tone felt like a possibility, a slim chance that he would pick up and say it was all a horrible misunderstanding. But each time, it clicked over to his voicemail, and his warm, confident voice, "You've reached Julian Wakefield. Leave a message." It felt like a cruel joke from a ghost. She never left a message. What could she say? By evening, the ringing stopped. Her calls went directly to the recorded, impersonal voice of the service provider. He had blocked her. The finality of that act was absolute. He hadn't just closed the door. He had bricked it up from his side, ensuring she could never reach him again. She stared at her phone for hours afterward, not crying, just numb. Each second of silence a small death of hope. Part of her had still believed in him, in the man she thought she knew. That part was now ash. The realization brought on a fresh wave of weeping, a storm of grief so violent she had to curl into a ball on the lumpy bed, clutching her belly as if to shield her child from the tidal wave of her own despair. But as the second day dawned, something began to shift. Amidst the depths of her sorrow, she felt a familiar flutter from within, a tiny, insistent kick against her side. It was a message from another world, a reminder of the life that was depending on her. A life that knew nothing of betrayal or heartbreak. It only knew her. In that moment, a flicker of a different emotion ignited through the fog of her grief. Anger. Not the helpless, weeping anger of a victim, but the fierce, protective fury of a mother. She would not let her child be born into this pit of despair. She would not let Julian's cruelty define their future. She was more than just his discarded wife. She was Sienna. And she was a mother. The tears stopped. She pushed herself off the bed, her movement stiff but purposeful. She went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on her swollen face, and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a wreck, but behind the puffy eyes there was a glint of steel. She hadn't seen it before. A plan began to form, hazy at first, but a plan nonetheless. Vermont. She would go back. She would use the blood money Julian had given her to find a small apartment, get a job, and build a life. A safe and loving life. For her and her baby, it would be hard, and it would be lonely, but it would be hers. She was just mentally composing a text to a realtor friend back home when a knock sounded on the hotel room door. It wasn't the timid tap of housekeeping. It was sharp, decisive, authoritative. Instantly, the carefully constructed wall of her resolve crumbled, and that wild, foolish hope surged back with dizzying force. Julian. It had to be. He'd had time to think. The anger had worn off. He'd realized the insanity of what he'd done. He had tracked her down. He had come to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to take them home. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she rushed to the door, her hands fumbling with the chain lock and the deadbolt. She pulled it open, her face already softening, her lips forming his name, ready to collapse into the embrace she so desperately craved. But the figure standing in the drab, poorly lit hallway was not her husband. It was Beatrice Wakefield. She was an apparition from another universe, dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Sienna's entire wardrobe. Her silver hair coiled into a perfect chignon, a diamond brooch glittering like a shard of ice on her lapel. She looked completely, utterly out of place, a creature of immense power and wealth, surveying a scene of squalor. Her cool, appraising eyes swept over Sienna's tear-ravaged face, her simple maternity dress, and the depressing room behind her. Her lips thinned in an expression of profound disapproval. Sienna felt the blood drain from her face. The hope vanished, replaced by a cold, stomach-churning dread. This was the final act of her humiliation. Beatrice, the icy matriarch who had always seen her as unworthy, had come to deliver the coup de grace, to serve the divorce papers. Personally, perhaps, to make it unequivocally clear, with her signature chilling poise, that the Wakefield family was washing its hands of the literature professor and her inconvenient baby. Beatrice. Sienna breathed the name, barely audible. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her belly in a protective gesture that was now second nature. "This is even more dreary than I imagined," Beatrice said, her voice as crisp and cool as a winter morning. Her gaze flickered around the room. He always did lack imagination in his cruelty. She met Sienna's eyes. "May I come in?" It was phrased as a question, but delivered as an edict. Wordlessly, Sienna stepped aside. Beatrice swept into the room, bringing with her the faint, expensive scent of Chanel No. 5, a fragrance that instantly overpowered the room's cheap disinfectant smell. She placed her pristine leather handbag on the scarred desk, a stark contrast of textures. She stood in the center of the small space, the undisputed center of gravity, and turned to face Sienna. Sienna braced herself, waiting for the inevitable condescending lecture. But the words that came out of Beatrice's mouth were not the ones she expected. "My son," Beatrice stated, her voice devoid of any warmth but filled with a strange, weary certainty, "is a brilliant, powerful, and monumental fool." Sienna could only stare, her mind struggling to process the statement. It was so contrary to anything she had ever heard from her mother-in-law that it felt like a line from a different play. "I am sure," Beatrice continued, her sharp eyes softening for a fraction of a second as they glanced at Sienna's stomach, "that you are confused. I am sure that you believe Julian is a monster. He has certainly given you every reason to." A flicker of Sienna's own anger returned. "He threw me out," she said, her voice trembling, but gaining strength. "He told me that our child was the biggest mistake of his life. He looked at me like you were nothing." Beatrice finished for her, stepping closer. "What else am I supposed to think?" "You are supposed to think," Beatrice countered, her tone unwavering, "that you married a man so terrified of losing you that he chose to detonate his own life, believing the blast would shield you from a greater threat. He is an arrogant man, Sienna. He believed he had the right to break your heart in order to save it. A foolish, masculine, and utterly infuriating piece of logic." Beatrice turned back to her handbag and retrieved a slim, dark gray tablet. "Julian lied to you," she said, her voice now low and serious. "He didn't stop loving you. In fact, he did this precisely because he loves you. He did this because he is being hunted, and he believes that by cutting you loose, the hunter will no longer see you as bait." Her head swimming, Sienna sank onto the edge of the lumpy bed. "What are you talking about?" "A threat. A ghost from his past," Beatrice said grimly, unlocking the tablet. "Do you recall the name? Damien Blackwell?" The name sent a faint chill down Sienna's spine. She remembered it from a passing conversation years ago. "The man from that hostile takeover? The one who went to prison?" "The very same," Beatrice confirmed. "Blackwell wasn't just a business rival. He was a sociopath who wore a CEO's suit. Julian didn't just outmaneuver him, he exposed him. For fraud, blackmail, and extortion that went far beyond the boardroom. Julian was the primary witness who ensured he was locked away. Blackwell swore revenge, not on the company but on Julian personally." Beatrice's face was grim. "He was released from a federal penitentiary 3.5 weeks ago, and he has made it his life's mission to dismantle Julian's world, piece by precious piece." She turned the tablet so Sienna could see the screen. It displayed what looked like a secured email. The text was cold, precise, and terrifying. "Wakefield, you took my world. Now I will take yours. Not your company. That's just bricks and mortar. I'll take what you love. I've seen your new life, the pretty wife, the literature professor. I hear there's a baby on the way, a legacy. It would be a tragedy if something were to happen to her, if she were to have an accident. I'll be watching." Sienna felt the air leave her lungs. Her blood ran cold. Below the text was a photograph. It was her, She was leaving a bookshop in downtown Aspen just a few days ago, smiling, a hand resting on her belly. The photo was taken from across the street, a telephoto shot, invasive and predatory. She had been stalked, catalogued, and threatened. This arrived at Julian's private email 3 weeks ago, Beatrice explained softly, seeing the color drain from Sienna's face. He's been living in a private hell ever since. He hired round-the-clock covert security for you. But Blackwell is slippery, a master of staying in the shadows. Julian became consumed by the idea that as long as you were publicly attached to him, you were a walking target. So he devised this plan. The pieces of the last few weeks slammed into place, with dizzying, sickening clarity. The withdrawn silences, the hushed phone calls, the new obsession with security protocols, the haunted look in his eyes. It wasn't a lack of love, it was an overdose of fear. He intended to create a public, brutal, and undeniable separation, Beatrice continued, her voice laced with exasperation for her son's methods. He believed if Blackwell thought you were discarded, worthless to him, you would cease to be a target. He planned to support you from afar, anonymously, until the threat was neutralized. It was a cold equation, Sienna, a business decision applied to a human heart. It was stupid, it was cruel, but it was born out of a desperate, terrified love. Sienna looked from the terrifying image on the tablet to Beatrice's resolute face. The intimidating matriarch was gone. In her place was a mother, fiercely angry at her son's foolishness and fiercely protective of her family. A man is not his best self when he is ruled by fear, Beatrice said, her gaze unwavering. He should have trusted you with the truth. He should have trusted in your shared strength. He failed you, not by ceasing to love you, but by failing to respect you. And that is a failure I will not permit to stand. She reached into her handbag again and produced a single, heavy key on a simple, elegant silver fob. It was the key to the front door of the estate. She held it out to Sienna. Julian may pay the mortgage, but the land that house sits on was bought by my grandfather. It is Wakefield land, and I, as the head of this family, say who belongs on it, Beatrice declared, her voice ringing with iron authority. A family does not scatter in the face of a threat. It closes ranks, it fortifies its walls, and it fights. You, Sienna, are carrying my grandchild. You are the future of this family. Your place is not in this transient hellhole. It is at home. Sienna stared at the key, then back at Beatrice's face. In a world that had been turned completely upside down, the most unexpected person had just become her anchor, her champion. Take the key, Beatrice commanded, a new warmth creeping into her tone. Pack your bag, you are going home. First, they would confront her foolish son. And then, as a family, they would go to war. The journey back to Aspen Heights was a passage from one reality to another. The Bentley moved with a silent, insulated grace through the chaotic tapestry of Colorado traffic, a bubble of immense privilege and power. Less than 48 hours ago, Sienna had traversed these same streets in the opposite direction. A nameless, heartbroken refugee in the back of a security car. Now, she was returning not as a supplicant, but as a queen being escorted to her fortress. The heavy, ornate key Beatrice had given her felt cool and solid in her palm, an anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. It wasn't just metal. It was validation, a symbol of her rightful place, a weapon against the phantom she had become in her own life. Beside her, Beatrice Wakefield sat ramrod straight, a portrait of serene command. She gazed out the window, but Sienna knew her attention was entirely focused on the younger woman beside her. He will not make this easy, Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the car's quiet hum. It wasn't a warning. It was a strategic assessment. When Julian is cornered by fear, his first and most trusted weapon is anger. He will lash out. He will try to make you feel small, foolish, and reckless for having returned. He will try to reassert the control he believes he has lost. Sienna turned to look at her mother-in-law, the woman who had transformed from a chilling enigma into an unexpected savior. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "You do not engage his anger with anger of your own," Beatrice advised, finally turning her piercing gray eyes on Sienna. "And you do not meet it with tears, at least not at first. He will see both as weakness, as predictable female hysterics. He is a man of logic, Sienna. He has built an entire fortress of misguided logic around this decision. You must dismantle it, brick by brick, with the one thing his logic cannot defend against: the emotional truth of the damage he has caused. Beatrice paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Remind him of his own words. Remind him of the pain. Do not allow him to hide behind the noble excuse of protection. Make him see the face of the man he became in that living room. He is terrified of Damien Blackwell, yes, but he should be more terrified of becoming a man who could so surgically destroy the woman he loves. That is the only thing that will reach him. As they glided through the opulent, tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, the familiar sight of manicured hedges and palatial homes no longer felt like a fairy tale. It felt like a battlefield, beautiful and deceptive. The Bentley slowed and turned into their private driveway. The grand estate rose before them, its windows dark and imposing. The chauffeur brought the car to a silent stop before the main entrance. Beatrice did not move to get out. "This is as far as I go," she said. "This is a battle between a husband and a wife. I have armed you and brought you to the gates. The rest you must do alone." She offered a small, rare smile. "Remember, you are the mother of a Wakefield. We do not crumble. We endure. We win." Sienna nodded, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She drew a deep breath, squeezed the key in her hand one last time, and stepped out of the car. The evening air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine. She walked up the stone steps, each footfall a declaration of her return. Without hesitation, she slid the key into the heavy oak door. The lock turned with a satisfying resonant click. The door swung open into the immense silent darkness of the foyer. Home. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, plunging herself into the familiar gloom. For a moment, she just stood there, letting her senses adjust. The air carried the faint bespoke scent of the house, a mix of lemon verbena, old books, and the subtle fragrance of the fresh lilies that were always in the entryway. But tonight, underneath it all, she could smell the ghost of her own despair. The lingering chill of betrayal. She didn't turn on the lights. She moved through the cavernous ground floor like a phantom, her hands grazing the surfaces of familiar objects. The polished wood of a credenza, the cool marble of a statue, the rough silk of the living room curtains. This was the room. The scene of the crime. She could almost see them, two specters locked in a tableau of cruelty and shock. His cold, indifferent face, her own, dissolving in tears. A shiver racked her body, but she pushed the memory down. It was fuel now, not poison. She settled into an armchair opposite the one he favored, the one he'd collapsed into just before delivering his final brutal verdict. She sat in the darkness, a sentinel, waiting for the return of a king who had abdicated his throne. The house was utterly silent, a vacuum amplifying the frantic beating of her own heart, and the gentle, reassuring flutter of the life inside her. She placed a hand on her belly. "We're in this together," she thought, a silent promise to her child. "I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for your father." Hours crawled by. With every distant sound, a car passing on the street, the sighing of the wind, her nerves screamed. She fought to remain calm, to hold on to the cold, clear resolve Beatrice had instilled in her. Finally, just after 10 p.m., she heard it, the low, familiar growl of his sports car coming up the driveway. The engine cut, followed by the soft crunch of tires on gravel. A car door slammed. Her breath hitched. Then the sound of a key in the lock, the same sound she had made hours before. The front door opened and closed with a heavy thud. She heard his weary footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer, the tired sigh he let out as he dropped his keys into a silver bowl. He was walking toward the living room, likely on his way to the bar to pour the drink he so clearly needed. He walked in, and for a full 5 seconds, he didn't see her in the shadows. He moved toward the decanters, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of exhaustion. Then a flicker of movement, perhaps her own involuntary breath, made him freeze. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes found her. Julian Wakefield stopped dead, his body going rigid in the dim light filtering in from the moonlit gardens. She saw his face cycle through a series of expressions with terrifying speed. First, utter, slack-jawed disbelief, as if his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Second, a flash of wild, impossible hope, so raw and vulnerable it almost broke her heart. And third, as his brain caught up, that hope was violently extinguished and replaced by sheer undiluted panic. which quickly hardened into a mask of cold, protective fury. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl meant to intimidate, to dominate. "How did you get in? Was it Martin? I swear to God, I'll have him fired and blacklisted so fast he'll never work in this town again." Sienna remained seated, her stillness a stark contrast to his explosive energy. She let his threats hang in the air and die. "Leave Martin alone," she said, her voice shockingly calm and clear in the tense silence. "He had nothing to do with it." "Then who?" he demanded, taking a menacing step forward. "Who let you in here? You're not supposed to be here. It's not safe." "Your mother gave me a key," Sienna stated simply, letting the words land. "And she gave me the truth, Julian, the whole truth." The name Damien Blackwell was an unspoken thunderclap in the room. His anger, so potent a moment before, seemed to stutter. The momentum went out of him, and he stared at her, his face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The fury was still there, but now it was laced with the frustration of a failed plan and the terror of discovery. "She had no right," he finally choked out, his voice hoarse. "This was my responsibility, my burden to carry. She had no idea what she's done. She's put you directly in the path of a monster." This was it, the moment Beatrice had prepared her for. Sienna rose slowly from the armchair, a queen ascending her throne, and faced him across the expensive Persian rug that had become their no-man's land. "No, Julian," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She did what you were too proud and too terrified to do. She treated me like your wife. And you are the one who put me in the path of a monster, not Blackwell. You. Right here in this room." "That's insane," he shot back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Everything I did, every horrible word, it was all to save you, to get you out of the line of fire. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Her laugh was a sharp, brittle sound, devoid of humor. "Don't you dare use that word. You didn't protect me. You eviscerated me. You took a scalpel to my heart and carved out every bit of happiness and security I had. Do you have any idea what the last 2 days have been like? Do you?" She took a step toward him, her eyes blazing. "You made me believe that our love was a sham. You called our child Julian, a situation, a mistake. You threw me out into the night with a wad of cash like I was some inconvenient affair you were finally ending. That isn't protection, that's a calculated act of psychological warfare. You were so consumed with saving my life," she said, her voice tight, shaking, "that you didn't give a damn about destroying my spirit. You don't understand the danger," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. "Blackwell isn't some corporate shark, he's unhinged. The things he did, the things he's capable of. I've been living in a cold sweat for weeks, imagining him getting his hands on you. I chose to hurt you myself," he said, breath ragged, "because the pain I could inflict was nothing compared to what he would do." "And that was your decision to make," she countered, her voice dropping to a low, intense level. "You, Julian Wakefield, the great protector, got to weigh the options and decide which form of torture your pregnant wife should endure. Without consulting her, without giving her the choice. You didn't just underestimate him, Julian. You underestimated me. You looked at me and you didn't see a partner. You didn't see a fighter. You saw a liability, a fragile object that needed to be hidden away." The truth of her words struck him like a thunderclap. He flinched, as if she had physically slapped him. The fury and bravado melted away, replaced by the dawning, horrifying realization of what he had done. Reflected in her eyes was the truth he hadn't dared to face. "I knelt on the floor of a cheap hotel room," she continued, her voice trembling as the memory took over, "and I begged to God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. To tell me what I did wrong. I held our baby, Julian, and I apologized to him. I told him I was sorry for failing, for not being enough to keep his father's love. That's the reality you created, not protection. Desolation," he broke. The rigid, powerful facade, the CEO, the tycoon, the protector, crumbled into dust. Julian stumbled backward and collapsed into the same armchair he had stood beside just 2 nights ago. He buried his face in his hands. A sob tore through his chest, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. "I'm sorry," he wept, the words muffled by his hands. "Oh God, Sienna, I'm so sorry. I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do. I was alone." "No," she whispered, walking over to him until she stood directly before his collapsed form. You weren't. You were never alone. You just chose to be. She knelt before him, just as she had imagined doing in her darkest moments of grief. But this time it was not in supplication. It was an act of grace. She gently took his wrists and pulled his hands away from his tear-ravaged face. He looked up at her, his eyes red, pleading. The eyes of the man she had married finally returned to her. "From now on," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable, "there are no more unilateral decisions. No more secrets, no more lies. Whatever this is, whatever comes for us, we face it together." He nodded, a wave of shuddering relief passing through him. He reached out a trembling hand and cradled her face, his thumb stroking the curve of her cheek. "Together," he echoed. The single word, not an ending, but the beginning of a long and difficult reclamation. The wound between them was deep and festering. The threat outside their walls was still very real. But for the first time in weeks, the king of the castle had understood that his greatest strength wasn't in his walls or his wealth, but in the queen he had so foolishly tried to cast away. In the end, it wasn't Julian's millions or his power that saved his family. It was the shocking, fierce loyalty of his mother and the incredible strength of his wife. They faced the threat together, a united front, built on a newly forged, unbreakable trust. The road to healing was long, but their love, tested by the cruelest of circumstances, proved to be real. This story shows us that sometimes the greatest acts of love can be terribly misguided, and that true strength isn't found in facing our fears alone, but in having the courage to trust the people who stand beside us. What did you think of Julian's drastic plan? Was he right to try and protect his family that way? Or was his cruelty unforgivable? So the story has ended. Our wonderful friends, are you still here with us? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, something in this story touched your heart. And if it did, let's pause here together for a moment and look a little deeper. What happens when the person you trust the most becomes the one who wounds you the deepest? When love tries to protect by breaking and strength shows up in silence and sacrifice? This story isn't just about betrayal or wealth or dramatic twists. It's about what it means to truly love someone when the stakes are terrifyingly high. Sienna's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always begin with an apology. It begins with honesty, with the courage to show up and be seen in our rawest, most broken form. And Julian? He teaches us that even the strongest people can be ruled by fear. But redemption is always possible when we choose vulnerability over control. Maybe you've been where Sienna was, confused, alone, asking, why wasn't I enough? And maybe, like Julian, you've made a decision out of fear that hurt someone you love. This story tells us it's never too late to choose truth over silence, to choose together over alone. There's a quote from Heterodoxism that says, "Healing isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about making peace with the cracks and finding new strength in the pieces." So if you're walking through something hard right now, please remember, you're not alone, you are not broken, and your story is still unfolding. If this story moved you, even just a little, I ask you, like it, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Because maybe, just maybe, the story you hear next will be the one that helps you heal. We'll be right here, waiting to walk through it with you.